Good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Zoom series. I'm Georgia Kelly, the Director of Praxis. Today we are hosting Sam Rosenthal, the Political Director of RootsAction in Washington, D.C. Sam Rosenthal is an organizer and researcher based in Washington, and he previously served as the Political Director of Our Revolution. I think many people who watch this are on their mailing list. And he's been in elected leadership with the Central Brooklyn Democratic Socialists of America. So welcome, Sam. It's great to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I want to say a little bit about what we're going to look at today. As you know, that Sam was well, not in the convention, but at the convention, and will be doing things around, was doing things around the convention. So we're going to talk about that today. And I wanted to ask you first a little bit about RootsAction. I think we all know something about it, but maybe give us just a brief overview of what RootsAction actually is doing.
Sure. RootsAction is a nationwide progressive organization working sort of on the left side of the political spectrum, adjacent to, but not within the Democratic Party. We focus on issues like foreign policy, civil liberties and surveillance, and we do some electoral work as well.
Great. And I know that RootsAction was one of the first organizations that actually started this Don't Run Joe campaign to get him to back out of running in 2024, which finally happened. And did you get a lot of backlash from that? Because I know when I was talking to people about we've got to get Biden out of the running, I got a lot of backlash from people who said, no, there's going to be no alternative. We have to stick with Biden. What was your finding at RootsAction?
Yeah, that's right. We were the first national group to call for Biden not to seek another term. That was back in late 2022. So this was right after the midterms, basically. We didn't want to, hurt the Democratic Party before the midterms, but after the midterms, we called for a different nominee. Um, and I think that initially we mostly were just ignored. We were at the DNC winter meeting, which is sort of pre-convention meeting that happens on the off 2 years when they don't have conventions. And we were there passing out flyers and trying to talk to members of the DNC. We were talking to the media. The foreign media was very interested in hearing what we had to say. So we talked to newspapers from Germany, from France, from the UK, and they took us at our word. They wanted to have in-depth conversations, but the US media was hostile or sort of derisive. They thought that we were being silly and that this was never ever going to happen. They couldn't get a member of Congress or a member of the DNC on record saying that they wanted a nominee other than Biden, because of course they couldn't. And so for them, this was a pie in the sky effort. But here we are now. We wish that the party had listened to us a bit earlier. We could have had a longer runway for Harris or for whoever ended up being the nominee. Maybe even we could have had a real robust primary process this time. But we're glad that we have a different nominee. I think it was becoming very clear that Biden was going to lose to Trump, and defeating Trump is one of our top priorities right now. Not because we love everything that Kamala Harris is saying, but because we are really attuned to the threat that Trump would pose in a second term to this country.
Yeah, one thing you just mentioned, that the foreign media was so much more interested in what you were saying in asking for Biden to not run, and the domestic media just didn't pay attention to you or didn't think it was relevant or that it was naive. And I really think that our media was naive in thinking that that couldn't happen. And I'm wondering if it's naive or it's just playing along with what they're supposed to be doing. It's like, is the media just complicit or is it stupid?
Yeah. Um, well, I wouldn't, I won't call them stupid, but I think that it was interesting to be inside of this campaign because you could see how different actors who needed to move were sort of stopped at the point of action by different forces. Within the Democratic Party, people were worried, members of Congress were worried about falling out with the party. This can be very damaging for their reelection chances. It can be damaging if they want to sit on committees, chair committees, and so on. Outside of the party, donors didn't want to throw in with the wrong horse. So they wanted to stay with Biden as long as he was the nominee. They didn't want to throw their money down the drain, as it were. And then the media, I think, the way our media is in this country now, we have a very corporatized media. Access is really important. And if you start asking the wrong questions, you can lose your access. And that's a fate worse than death for lots of journalists, many of whom individually are great journalists, but they're working under this very corporatized media umbrella. And it's really hard for them to say to an editor or publisher, I'm going to go for the president. I'm going to ask some really hard questions of, Hakeem Jeffries or Nancy Pelosi, if they know that that means they're going to be a persona non grata for the next 6 months on Capitol Hill, because that would be the end of their career. So it was really kind of a depressing experience to see how these folks were jammed up and saying what they really wanted to say. I mean, off the record, people would say to you, I really think this is a bad idea. We're heading for disaster. But no one would, go on the record with a prominent media publication until Democratic leadership sort of gave the signal, as we saw, that it was okay to do that.
Right, they had to give the signal. That's very interesting. I want to go now to the convention because Roots Action planned something prior to the convention. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing before it started, and then we'll get into what was happening during it.
Sure. So we were sort of, I don't want to take too much credit for it. We were sort of bit players in this event, in the planning of the event, but there's a convening called Progressive Central that's run for many years before the DNC. Progressive Democrats of America were sort of the lead planners there. And the idea with this event is to say, what if progressives within and outside the Democratic Party, what if we were the party? And I don't know what party that is, but what if we were the party? What would our convention look like? So there were panels talking about the labor movement and kind of the rebirth that we've seen of the labor movement, and what does that mean for the future? What kind of policy would we draw to keep building the labor movement? Policies about the need still for Medicare for all, for universal health care in this country. There were panels discussing foreign policy, discussing the need urgently to end forever wars, to stop arming Israel, to stop abetting this sort of ongoing stalemate of death and destruction in Ukraine, and to think about alternatives for foreign policy that's not just sending weapons to our allies in perpetuity overseas. So it was a really wonderful event. We had lots of folks from Congress speaking there. Bernie Sanders came, of course. We had Pramila Jayapal speaking. We also had Stacey Davis Gates from the Chicago Teachers Union, who's a great leader there in Chicago, who I think we'll see more of in the next couple of years on the national scene. I hope we do. We had Sarah Nelson from the Flight Attendants Union. So this was a great cast of characters, both from kind of grassroots activism, from labor, and from Congress as well. And it was really an encouraging event. It was great to be there.
Now, why wasn't this covered by the media? This sounds much more interesting.
We had some media there, mostly, left-wing media. Some journalists who I knew were there. But yeah, it wasn't covered in the mainstream media hardly at all. I think those folks were too busy standing in line for like 3 hours to get into the United Center. So we didn't have a lot of mainstream media there. One or two people, I think, but this is not really, the DNC is not an arena in which people seriously discuss policy, I think. You probably noticed that if you watched, any night of the DNC that was broadcast. It's a cheerleading festival. It was
It's
sort
a
of,
spectacle.
yeah, it's a spectacle. It's the Oscars meets prom meets,
Right.
homecoming or something like that for the Democratic Party. And people don't want to have serious policy conversations there, because that's not what the spirit of the event is in their minds. And
Right.
so it's sort of anathema to the press to go and sit and think soberly about what should our healthcare policy look like? Shouldn't we raise the minimum wage at the federal level finally, and so on.
Yeah, it seems like your meeting was a lot more important to cover. Is there any written information on it? I mean, has it been taped? Has it been recorded?
We have lots of recordings. We put some up on our Progressive Hub site,
Great.
interviews with people who spoke there. We had great speakers. Senator Nina Turner was there. who gave an amazing, real barn burner of a speech, and we spoke
Mm.
to her afterwards. But we also, I'm sure that there are videos of the panels on PDA's site, and I can find them and send them along to you.
Great. I think we'd be interested in knowing more about that because the policy convention is what would be interesting to people at Praxis for sure. And
Right,
I was a delegate at a Democratic convention years ago, so I know exactly how they're planned and what the purpose of them is. And it is a showcase. It's a spectacle. It's not, unfortunately, it's not about policy, which I think is what people
right.
should learn about, but don't. Now, what was the take from the people that you were with there on what was actually happening at the convention? Were you surprised by anything, encouraged by anything, or discouraged by something? What was the take that you got from the progressives you were around in Chicago?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting time in the progressive movement. I think that a pessimistic analysis would say we sort of feel like we're back where we started. We're on the margins again, a little bit of the party. What's happening in the progressive world isn't, the main driver of action in the Democratic Party right now. But I think that also we did see at the convention the mainstreaming of a lot of the things that progressives were pushing for 8 years ago when we were, marginalized before we had this resurgence. So there are things that have gotten into sort of party mainstream, party orthodoxy that a while ago we really didn't think were going to be planks, fundamental planks of the Democratic Party. I mean, just the fact that we have the Democrats as the party of, the pro-choice party. Even 10 years ago, there were lots and lots of anti-abortion Democrats who were in the party and were accepted in the party. And there still are a few, and it's not like they've been entirely pushed out, but the Democrats are much more ardently embracing that. The party's also really enthusiastic about the surge in labor. They want to work with labor very closely. Um, so I think those are good indicators. And there's also some sense that we have a student debt crisis, we have a medical debt crisis, and these things need to be addressed. And I think that at its most corporatist, the Democratic Party was happy to ignore things like that, and now it's doing it less. But at the same time, this was very much a kind of circling of the wagons. I think that the big divisive issue, and this won't surprise anyone, was Gaza, and what will the party's stance be to Gaza, and specifically, what will Kamala Harris's stance be towards Gaza if she's going to be the next president? And we hope she is. We hope that she beats Trump. But I think it was a bit depressing to see the degree to which that was sidelined. RootsAction was one of many groups that worked with the uncommitted movement that has been working for a ceasefire since, the beginning of the war in Gaza. And we knew some of the folks who were there from the uncommitted movement who wanted to have a member of the movement speak at the DNC. That wasn't allowed. They did sort of have a seminar session as part of the DNC programming, but it was very much sidelined. It wasn't in prime time.
Mhm.
And so this is, something the Democratic Party is going to have to contend with. This isn't going to go away. It's really clear that Netanyahu is totally dug in now. So it was disheartening, I think, to see them still try to keep this at arm's length, leadership to keep this at arm's length. They really don't want to have to come down on one side of this. I mean, they've already come down on one side of it. They're, backing Israel there. But I think that they are going to have to reckon with the shifting circumstances in Gaza, and they just don't want to do that yet. So that was disheartening. And then what was encouraging was just to see people feeling optimistic that, and happy that Joe Biden isn't the nominee, and to have a sense of, okay, well, maybe we can, the Democrats can win this election.
Yes. One of the things that you just mentioned before are the forever wars. And I think what we can feel heartened by are there will be domestic changes, policies that affect us in America will change, like the abortion issue, and we may get some better medical care. And maybe we'll finally get what Bernie Sanders has been working for forever. But it's going to be a long haul for that one. And I think a lot of work. But The thing that really has bothered me is I can see we will get domestic changes in our policies here that will affect our lives, definitely. But I don't see any change on the horizon with our forever wars. I mean, our whole NATO enlargement, the forever wars that we have, even to the point where they're progressives cheering on Ukraine like it's a football game. And this really, really bothers me. It's like, where have the peaceniks gone with the Ukraine? They're there for the Gaza and Israel, but we've lost them on Ukraine. And I want to know what your thinking is on this.
Yeah, I think that the Democratic Party has not yet taken seriously the very real possibility that they could lose ground on this front to the Republican Party. I mean, the Democratic Party, I think now seems to be the more ardently pro forever war party, and this has to do a bit with the genesis of Trump's election in 2016. Democrats who are really, really anti-Russian in a way that I don't think they were before that election. It's sort of part of the tapestry of Democratic policy belief now that Putin is the worst person in the world, and anything we can do to weaken him is, we have a duty to do that. But I'm not sure the Democrats have thought about what the long-term consequences will be if they're perceived by a new generation to be the war party, and the Republicans, via isolationism, but it doesn't really matter how you get there, are the party saying we should keep those tax dollars at home. We shouldn't send them abroad. We shouldn't just let these wars go on in perpetuity. We should pull back and let other countries handle their conflicts. So that to me is a major, major pitfall of the strategy. And I just don't think the party is taking a long view on this, just from a realpolitik kind of standpoint. And then, of course, at RootsAction, we're peaceniks. We're any opportunity to lessen the amount of conflict and sort of the degree of intensity of conflict around the world is an opportunity we want to take. So yeah, we've said for a long time now, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has clearly reached stalemate. And there needs to be a diplomatic end to what's happening there. We cannot just keep sending material and arms and expect that there's going to be some breakthrough from Ukraine, which is, frankly, a much smaller country with a much smaller military and fewer people who will fight ultimately. It's not a conflict they can win through attrition. We need to have an end to the killing there, and it has to be through diplomatic means. There's no other way to resolve that.
Yeah, and when you're saying that the Democratic Party might be looked upon now as the war party, the forever war party, that's exactly what I've been thinking. And I'm sure a lot of young people I know are thinking that we have become that party. I'm not sure it would really be different under Republicans, but because it seems to be the foreign policy that we have has usually superseded the parties. No matter which party is in, we always seem to support war and sending more weapons to more countries. So that I think is something that I really would like to not go into in a lot of detail now, but it's definitely a problem that the Democratic Party is now being perceived this way. And I think what I mentioned before that has been very disturbing to me is how people who would normally support negotiations and peace have been lured into a position of supporting a team instead of negotiations. So that, do you hear people talking about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were just discussing, um, the strong desire of members of Congress not to step out of line, not to be seen as pariahs within their own party. And I think this is another classic case where folks feel vulnerable to that. And calling for a ceasefire right now or saying stop sending arms aligns a Democrat more with Matt Gaetz than it does with members of their own party. And so they don't want to be perceived to be sort of in that group of folks. I
There's
don't know if that
Bernie.
answered your question or.
Well, Bernie is certainly asking for ceasefires, and
Yeah, certainly there are some Democrats who are, but I think, the mainstream of the Democratic Party is still very ardently in favor of maintaining this conflict.
being in line with the party story. So now I want
Right.
to ask you about some of the campaigns that Roots Action is doing now and ones that we might be able to be involved in.
Sure. So, we're continuing to press for peace in Gaza, ceasefire in Gaza. And we're part of various networks that are trying to work towards that. And that's, both by trying to maintain the anti-war movement here, maintain demonstrations, the outside strategy, as it were, and also to pressure members of Congress. We've been part of efforts to get members of Congress to sign on to a ceasefire, to support bills for ceasefire as they make their way through Congress. And as the next session starts up here soon, this will come back to the fore, we hope. But it's important for all of us who care about achieving a ceasefire there and thinking about what we can do to rectify the terrible situation that many residents of Gaza now find themselves in, to keep this at the front of the headlines. I'm sure everyone has seen that it's receding farther and farther from the front page, and this is by design. And this conflict really could drag on for years if we don't keep the pressure on.
And I think,
We Go ahead, yeah.
well, I was just thinking there's also the danger of this spreading in the Middle East
Yes, yeah,
with Iran, Syria. It seems very dangerous the way Netanyahu has just dug in, as you said earlier, and
yeah.
doesn't seem to respond to any of the pressure. Do you have any feeling about where this might go in the next month or two, or is it going to be after the election before anything changes?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu's waiting to see what happens with the election here. He's hoping to get Trump back in office because he thinks that will be more favorable for him. He has, domestic problems he's got to corral as well. I think that he's facing an increasingly deteriorating climate at home too. So it's really, a waiting game for him. And I think he's really trying to run the clock out, get a more favorable situation to his mind in the US. And then, maybe he thinks he has carte blanche to, attack Lebanon, attack Iran, move into Syria, and be sort of the tip of the spear to realize all the fever dreams of the neoconservatives in the US, that we can democratize the entire Middle East or something like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't know how much of a will he can muster domestically for something like that. And I don't think the US has appetite for a true multi-country conflagration in the Middle East, but I don't know. It's more on the table than it's been for quite some time. And as we saw during Trump's first term, his foreign policy is incoherent and based on his feeling and how he feels when he wakes up that day and whether he likes this person or that person. So if he's back in office, all bets are off. I don't know where we could end up. It could be a very bad place, though.
Well, if he ends up back in office, I fear for the whole planet, actually. And
Yeah.
hopefully that won't happen. And I know you're working on that too. And one last thing I wanted to ask you is Roots Action, or are you involved still with our revolution, or you work together in some way?
Our revolution is still in a lot of the coalitions we work in. We sort of had a formation called the Bernie Delegates Network that our revolution was part of, and that's, self-explanatory, but delegates for Bernie in 2016 and 2020 who have done a lot of work within their state Democratic parties, which is an oft-neglected part of the Democratic Party apparatus, but an important space to reform and change into a more progressive series of formations if we want the national party to go that way, which I think we do. I mean, Roots Action is an organization that mostly tries to work within the Democratic Party where we can. We're not really third party aligned, so reforming these state parties is part of that too. And our revolution has been a big part of that.
Right. And if there's anything you want to say about Roots Action before I open it up for questions, this would be the time to do that. If there's something particular you'd like us to know, I put the website in the chat box.
Yeah, sure. You can go to rootsaction.org to see more about our campaigns. We're always available if you want to chat with us about an idea you have locally. We really do want to be plugged into the grassroots and we want to be supportive of local efforts, especially those around anti-war events, pro-peace events. we have capacity to support things locally and we want to be useful. So please reach out if you're involved in any work like that.
Yeah, I saw that you had there's something on the front page that says if you have an idea for a campaign to send it in, which I think
Yeah,
is
yeah.
great. It gives a national stage in a way to things that people wouldn't have otherwise. So if anyone would like to ask anything or make comments, this would be the time to do that. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I enjoyed your analysis very much, and I think all of us here are pretty much in agreement. The one thing that strikes me, and I'm an environmental lawyer, is that you didn't say one word about the climate crisis, and there was hardly any mention of it at the DNC. And what there was touting the Inflation Reduction Act, which is deeply flawed and promotes a lot of additional fossil fuel development. So I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Right. Good question.
Yeah, yeah. We have done climate work in the past at RootsAction. We also work with groups like Climate Defiance, who are, primarily interested in doing climate work. But I agree with you. I think that we're in a moment where there isn't as much focus on climate. We were backers of the Green New Deal when that was sort of looked like there was more momentum behind that in Congress, but that's no longer the case. I think that there is a sense that the IRA was, because Biden says it, quote, the most ambitious climate policy ever passed or
Yeah, but
something
see,
like that.
that's
But we don't agree with that analysis, but I just think that kind
yeah.
of at the mainstream level, there's a sense that, okay, we've done something for climate, now let's move on. I don't think that's right. I think that we need to have a much more aggressive climate policy, but we're in an election, in the speed run to the election right now, and Kamala Harris is not going to ban fracking, she said the other day, and
That's right.
the electoral politics of things have really taken hold now, I think, and climate is tough because of the geography of this country and swing states right now. We'll see. I'm hopeful that if the Democrats have control of, the House and the Senate and the presidency, or two of the three, that we'll see another push for climate action. But there wasn't a lot of discussion, as you say, about it at the DNC. I think it's back burner right now.
And was there a lot of discussion at the program that you had before the
Oh
DNC?
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Figured
this
it.
is still a core part of the progressive platform,
Right,
is the urgent need for climate reform, for, to take climate change seriously in this country.
right. Yeah, they still don't. And I think you were right that people think it has, because of the way media has treated the um, Biden's work, that it's solves for the moment, or at least that it gives us time until after the election to do something about
Right.
it, which is,
I think it's really important to debunk that.
yeah, yeah,
I sent you that thing, Georgia, from Center for Biological Diversity about their take on the Inflation Reduction Act.
yeah.
I mean, they called it a climate suicide pact. Uh, it's really bad.
Well, yeah, I haven't had a chance to look
Oh,
at
you didn't read it? Okay. Anyway, yeah, I mean, to
it.
me, everything that you said, Sam, sounds right on, and you obviously have a very good capacity for analysis and articulation, but it's kind of all within a framework that's unsustainable. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think
that's
we
what I
all
take
agree on
from
that.
it. Yeah, but you don't hear that very much. I mean, we need a radical transformation of our whole socioeconomic system.
Well,
And
that's
and you know, I feel like I'm sometimes coming from Mars when I even say that. You know,
coming from where?
Mars.
Oh,
That
Mars. Yes. Well, maybe you do come from Mars.
yeah, that's a possibility. But
Maybe we all do.
anyway,
I'm going to go to Brian next, and we can
okay, go
come
ahead.
back
Yeah.
to you if you want to. Okay, Brian.
Sam, thanks for being here today. I had two questions for you. how many Congress people would you say, number one, are aligned with Roots Action? And the second question is, given the fact that we're spending $886 billion every year on the military war machine budget, what is Roots Action doing to really educate people that that's insane, spending $886 billion every year on the military war machine budget?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. To your first question, I would say, folks in Congress are aligned with Roots Action and groups like Roots Action in different ways. Some are very aligned with us broadly. Our whole program is a program they share for the most part. People like Bernie Sanders, for example. Others are very aligned on particular issues. We have people in Congress who really care about civil liberties, which is something Roots Action works on a lot. Whistleblower rights and things like that. And they are not as progressive maybe on healthcare or something like that. So we still want to work with these folks. I mean, we don't want to be purists about who we work with, but it's a thorny business working with Congress, and people are with you and then they're not with you, and that's kind of the nature of doing this work. But at the Progressive Central, we had probably 20 different Congress people come in at some time, speaking on panels, phoning in to give a video address. So there's a good block there, and I think this is why we do the electoral work too, because we want that block to keep growing. I'm sure everyone saw that we lost members of kind of the most ardently progressive group in Congress through I think the first and the third most expensive Democratic primary ever, with Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. And this is a terrible loss for the movement. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. And so we need to, double down again to get people like that back into Congress and at, the state level, the local level, and so on. Your second point, I think that, or your second question, I think that, it's important to say we're pro-peace, we're anti-war. And this is, this size military budget is ridiculous on its face. It's bigger than the next 10 military budgets put together and so on. And it's really important to keep making those points. But I think it's also important to say, when we talk about why we can't fund Medicare for all, part of what we're talking about is, where is the money going? And it's going to this military budget. Some of the things that we want that have broad support in this country are contingent on us being able to spend money that we're currently spending to keep nukes sitting there, to keep updating the software that keeps nukes from exploding in their silos where they're sitting, because they've been sitting there for 40 years or something. We're spinning our wheels on the military front in a way that I don't think most Americans are aware of, and it costs a huge amount of money just to maintain the systems we have, not to even, start talking about some of the R&D that realizes nothing. Not that I want more weapons built, but, you spend billions of dollars and then, the plane never gets off the ground, literally in some cases. It's a profligate waste of money. And I think that education is important, but also saying, this is why we can't talk about funding affordable housing, bringing back the child tax care credit, bringing back free lunches and so on. This is where the money's going.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, this very interesting. I wanted to ask about the pre-convention that you had before the convention that Roots Action was part of. Did anyone think of contacting C-SPAN to cover it?
I'm not sure. I wasn't in on that phase of the planning. That would have been great though, but
Wouldn't it?
yeah,
I mean,
no
I think
C-SPAN.
yeah, I actually got a TV. The first TV I ever bought in my life, I bought to watch C-SPAN because I am a political person. But I feel like C-SPAN would have covered some of it at least, if someone had reached out to them. And it's something to think about in the future when you have things like that, because a lot of people would see it. And to have a place where people could be tuning in to see it would be really fabulous. And I think it's worth contacting them for some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll make a note for the future, definitely.
Yeah, they're not corporate controlled in
Yeah,
the way
right,
that the other
right.
media is. Um, there are other questions because I wanted to go back over something that you said if there aren't. When it comes to the budget, and again, I think what Jerry brought up is that we're looking at a system that prioritizes certain things because of the corporate control of our country and of our government. And the war machine is such a huge part of our economy. And at times I've called us a war economy because it seems like what would we do without all this money going to war weapons and to well, actually propping up NATO all over the world, as well as the 700, 800 military bases we have. And I just wanted to bring up one thing and see if you have any comment on this, and then we will go to a question. But I looked up at one point, I thought, we're hearing all this danger coming from Russia and how they're trying to take over the whole part of Europe. And that's why they are in Ukraine. I thought, well, gee, I wonder how many foreign bases Russia has compared to the US. So I started doing research on it. We've got close to 800. They have less than 20 foreign bases. So it's like, how can we say that when we're the one with all the bases all over the world, not them? And I just think it's an interesting juxtaposition. And if you have any comment on that, I'd be curious.
Yeah, I think this is, a classic US foreign policy, yes for me, but not for thee. I mean, this is sort of the logic of the Cold War just continued into our present. And I think when you talk about having a wartime economy, I think that's absolutely right. And you've seen since, sort of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, American foreign policy has really been characterized by searching for conflicts of the same scale so that we can keep stimulating the war economy. And so, the war on terror was kind of a great find in that sense, because that meant that we could spool the war machine back up to the levels that it was running at. I think that this, conflict with Ukraine is also a gift to people like, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, because this helps to stimulate that economy. And so the logic of that economy is that it has to be constantly fed conflict at a a large scale, conflict at a high degree of intensity, so that it can keep spinning the wheels. It can maintain the rationale for that kind of production. And we're in a terrible place where we have a kind of too big to fail military industrial complex with too much money, lobbying in Congress all the time, and with such an elaborate apparatus that they can't really sustain periods of sort of more placid historical moments. And so they have to keep spurring conflict wherever they can. So, we have to educate around that. We have to agitate around that. But we also have to talk about other ways that we can, keep job growth going in this country that aren't aligned with war, aren't aligned with catastrophe. And I think that, Jerry was talking earlier about climate action. That's a great place where we can create more job opportunities, create manufacturing, heavy production opportunities where we don't have to think about weapons going overseas. That would be a great place for us to invest.
Right. It reminded me of a person I interviewed a while back, Richard Sacco, who wrote a book called The Lost Peace, which was about the peace we could have had, the peace dividend we were promised at the end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. And of course, we never got it. And I remember thinking at that time, where are they going to find the place to put the war money now? Where are they going to find the next war? And, I was already suspicious that they were looking for a place for more war so they could continue to feed this military industrial complex. So anyway, I'm going to go to another question. I think Mike has his hand up. Mike, do you want to ask something?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks so much for. I'm sorry I missed the beginning. I'll have to watch it when I look it up later. I actually got stuck in a vet clinic and I just couldn't. It was very strange. Anyway, it's interesting how the climate change thing, and I feel like I understand it, has gone into the background. To me, it makes sense. There's just 100 other things that seem to be that seem to be on everybody's mind right now. Women's rights, just go through the list. And of course, the climate change, it's, the fate of the world. You'd think that would be important, but everybody wants to get Kamala in. My question, first of all, the military spending, that's interesting. I feel the same way as all of you, 100%. But it's interesting how some people don't feel that way. Like, for example, Robert, I think that's his name, Robert, the guy, I think he's from Arizona, who says it's a very small percentage of our budget. And I just never really heard anybody say it that way. It's a very small percentage of our budget, which is interesting. $900 billion. But Bob, yeah. But on the Israel, Ukraine, the wars, I'm wondering what people think, Sam and anybody else, that how different would it really be who gets in? Tell me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, Trump, the one thing I can say about Trump that I might even infinitesimally find as positive is that he doesn't really want to get involved in wars. He might scare somebody or say something insane, but he doesn't really, I don't think, it's a hands-off approach, America first, blah, blah, blah. Whereas I almost think, and I hate to say it, that the Democrats are kind of more dangerous on this because they seem to, I don't know, that's exaggerating because plenty of Republicans are too. But anyway, I don't see much difference on these war issues on the two parties about what would really happen. How would Kamala do any different? How would Trump do any different than Kamala? And I'm just curious what anybody's thoughts would be. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've been having this conversation a lot with especially people who have been working in the uncommitted movement, many of whom were, certainly not going to vote for Joe Biden and have real misgivings about voting for Kamala Harris too. And I think that's right. I mean, I can't remember when you joined the call, but we were talking earlier about the risk that Democrats will cede the anti-war mantle to Republicans. They come at it through different ideologies, but as you say, Trump certainly is more conflict averse. I think in the first place, to respond to your comment, these conflicts are already going on. So Trump doesn't really have much of a choice about whether to be in them or not. We're already in them. And I think it's unlikely that he would unilaterally say, we're done with Ukraine, we're done with Israel. I think even for the Republican Party, comparatively isolationist as they are, that would be pretty extreme. So I don't foresee that happening. And then I just think, this election is a lot about just choosing the political terrain we want to operate in. If Donald Trump is president, we can have the biggest anti-war protests the world has ever seen, and he won't care because those aren't his constituents. Those aren't the people who are going to, help get his son elected or whatever he wants to have happen after this. And if Harris is the president, at least she has to worry about re-election if that happens. Just at a really basic self-preservationist level, she has to feel anxiety if there's a really robust anti-war movement, because those are her constituents. Those are some of them, and this was the kind of, background logic of the uncommitted movement in Michigan in particular was to say, look, the margin was about 100,000 votes. We're going to try to get about 100,000 people to say they're voting uncommitted, just to show you this state is not in hand whatsoever for the Democrats. I mean, it's never in hand for the Democrats, but these are Democratic voters who are really unhappy with your policy in Israel-Palestine, and we want to see a change. And so I think that if Harris wins, the conditions are better for us to continue that agitation, and in Ukraine too, to say we're done sending, material and weapons and money into this conflagration that, for no reason. Why are we doing this? Whereas I think if the Trump's in the White House, it doesn't matter what we say. He won't listen at all.
Listen at all. Jerry, I think maybe.
Yeah. Sam, as far as what you said about we could fuel more economic growth, if, with climate, with Green New Deal type measures, if we weren't spending it on the military. I am absolutely 100% certain that there's no way forward to solve the climate crisis and maintain economic growth. I mean, the way Michael Moore put it is that infinite growth on a finite planet is suicidal. And I think that pretty much sums it up. And that's another point of view that is very marginal. And obviously, you don't even think that way, even someone as progressive as you are. So I'm just calling that to your attention. And there's a book called Is Science Enough by Aviva Chomsky, who is Noam Chomsky's daughter. It's an excellent book that really talks about what I've just said.
And by the way, I interviewed Aviva Chomsky, and we have that on our YouTube channel, so you could hear that. Yeah, she's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Any comments on that, Sam?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I don't have the one-to-one comparison. Politically, though, I think that we have to make this case right now that there is employment in a future where the US turns to renewable sources of energy, because people are not stupid about this. They know that if we start phasing out fossil fuel production, that lots of people are going to lose their jobs. And, some of these people are the CEOs of, BPUS and whatever, people who I don't think we're that worried about them losing their jobs, but most are not. Most are working people who are, looking for a paycheck. And we have to be able to make some claim about where the next paycheck will come from. If we phase out this job, there has to be a job on the other side. And I agree that in the long term, I don't think we can just continue to grow forever. But I think that in the short term, to make this case politically, we have to be able to outline, at least to some extent, how we're going to account for all these lost jobs that will happen if we start to phase out fossil fuels completely, which we need to do.
We need
Yeah, I mean, I understand that perspective. The thing is, there isn't a long term for the climate. Pretty much the end of this decade is it. The IPCC, which isn't a radical organization, has said that. If we don't really reverse the trends now, and to be clear, global emissions are rising, and they're not only rising, but they're rising at an accelerated rate with all the talk and all the Green New Deals. So what you're talking about is what kind of just transition could there be,
Yeah.
right? And the only just transition you can conceive of, and from a point of view of political feasibility, it's hard to say you're wrong, is to talk about green jobs.
Right. Well, that's what he's talking about. I think one of kind of a bizarre thing is that the UN meetings on climate are taking place in these oil-rich countries hosted
Of course.
by these oil manufacturers. I mean, has it been co-opted? Is it still really
Yes,
working?
it's been co-opted.
I mean, it's just hard to believe that it's really real anymore with it being hosted in these oil-rich nations. Like,
Well, what's your friend who always goes, who wrote that great book? It's the stories in our bones.
oh yes, Osprey Oriole Lake. Yeah.
Oriole Lake. I mean, she goes because there's a whole alternative group of people who come to those conferences of the parties. But yes, the mainstream COP has, been totally co-opted.
Our last question will be from you, Brian.
Yeah. Before my question, I just got to say, Mike, I love your T-shirt. Keep the immigrants. I hadn't seen that shirt before, Mike. Keep the immigrants. Beautiful. Whoa. Whoa, that is so awesome. So, Sam, one other question for you. Normally, I would go with a third-party candidate for president, but I can't this time because Trump is too scary, too dangerous, too all the above. But I also noticed that Bernie Sanders is all in for Harris. Did that surprise you? Because it surprised me.
Yeah, I think that we were a bit surprised, those of us who have been kind of on the Bernie wing of the party loosely, not just by that, but a little bit by his vociferous defense of Biden before he dropped out too. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think, I'm not privy to like Bernie's inner circle and what they're thinking. But I imagine that there was some calculus made about how will it be easier for us to get some of these policies that Bernie's been fighting for a long time in. And I think that he has decided, since the beginning of the Biden presidency, that playing nice and playing ball with the party has been better for him. And that, I think he feels like he had some influence on the direction of legislation like the IRA. He, influenced the direction of Build Back Better that didn't get passed, but I think he feels like he's had some impact, some influence on the party. Whether, we can agree or disagree about that. I think that I kind of liked confrontational Bernie more than I like accommodating Bernie, but I can see the logic to it. And he's had a really long, I mean, his record is very long on this. He's had a long career. And so I can't begrudge him thinking, well, this might be the avenue by which I can see more of my policies affected while I'm still a member of Congress. And so I was a little surprised. I'm surprised that he continues to be um, a cheerleader, but that's his. I was just describing another political calculus I think we should make about voting for Harris, and that's his calculus that he's made. And so, we're all looking for avenues by which we can either, covertly or overtly affect the change we want to see here. So I rarely begrudge other people their strategies.
Thank
And I
you.
think Bernie has tried so many different strategies over the years that it's really great to see him still thinking in new ways to how to affect change. And I really admire that. It's like he doesn't just dig his heels in and do things one way forever. He's trying different things. And I think we all need to do that. And I really admire that in him also. And of course, I've been a long time Bernie fan. I want to thank you, Sam. This has been really interesting today. And you are so articulate and so well informed. It's been,
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great being here and great chatting with you all.
yeah, well, we really appreciate it. And
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
let you all
Thank you all.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you will get the link tonight. We will have the video ready tonight sometime, and you can watch it again, and other people will get to see it. So thank you, Sam. I think
Thank you, Sam.
that
Thanks
you-
for the compliment, Brian. The rest of it says, deport the racists, keep the immigrants, deport the racists. So it was either this T-shirt or put a woman in charge. So I wear both those every day.
Awesome, Mike.
That's a story there. Yeah.
It's a
That
beautiful shirt.
pisses some people off, but I
So what?
I don't care.
Good work.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks. It was good to hear you.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
be in touch with you, Sam. Thanks again.
Sounds great. Thanks again. Take care.